marketers. Deborah Eckerling here.
And I'm Keith Smith, and we host the MPN Meta Marketing Show, which is not just another marketing podcast, but the marketing podcast about all the other marketing podcasts.
Podcasts are booming, right? We love them, and people actually listen. They don't scroll, they don't swipe. Well, except maybe during the ad breaks.
But here's the secret. With the Marketing Podcast Network, your ads don't make people hit skip. We put your brand on shows that people actually want to hear.
That's right. We match your message with podcasts that make marketing nerds like us perk up and take notes. Or at least nod knowingly, pretending they understand.
And don't worry, because we'll deliver your ad naturally. People might even think that we love your brand personally, which of course we totally do, unless it's a veggie smoothie, then maybe not.
If you want your brand heard without making listeners roll their eyes,
head to marketingpodcasts.net and catch marketing fans at work, rest, and play. Seriously, your audience is already listening. Make sure they hear your brand and not our awkward jokes.
Join the conversation, because good ads shouldn't just be tolerated, they should be enjoyed.
Yes!
Hey, have you heard about Podcast On? This is a global podcast charity event where hosts dedicate one episode to a nonprofit they care about and release it together the same week. No fundraising, no fees, just powerful storytelling for good. Podcast On 2026 runs March 14th to March 20th. Join thousands of podcasters worldwide and use your voice for impact. It's free, it's simple, and it starts at podcasthon.org.
The Marketing Podcast Network is a proud partner of Podcast On.
Welcome to Your Radiant Spirit, the podcast where art, energy, and inspiration come alive. Hosted by award-winning intuitive painter Heather Eck, synesthetic artist, chakra expert, and spiritual guide, this show invites you to explore the transformative power of color, creativity, and spiritual healing. Heather's unique gift of seeing color through energy fuels her stunning spirit portraits and chakra-aligned artworks, designed to bring healing and alignment to your life. Whether you're curious about the magic of chakras, looking to unlock your creative potential, or eager to connect with your radiant spirit, you're in the right place. Your radiant spirit is calling. Let's dive in.
Okay, welcome back to Your Radiant Spirit. I'm so excited to share with you. Our guest today is Dr. Lillea Hartwell. Dr. Lillea Hartwell is an award-winning naturopathic doctor, registered herbalist, and scholar specializing in botanical medicine, nutrient replacement, and autoimmune care. With a doctorate in naturopathic medicine from the Sonoran University of Health Sciences and a background in plant and environmental sciences, she bridges traditional herbal wisdom with evidence-based practices. Her passion for global botanical medicine has led her to study indigenous plant uses worldwide. She integrates herbal medicine, clinical nutrition, and mind-body techniques to help patients restore balance and heal naturally. Dr. Hartwell is dedicated to empowering others with the knowledge to safely and effectively use plant medicine for long-term wellness. And that sounds amazing. And we were just chatting before. You were telling me a little bit about how you got started in this, but please, share with us how you got started. We're so excited to have you here today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Heather. I'm really excited to share this with you as well, because I think as we were kind of having our initial discussion, it's so pivotal in order to honor and be the most radiant version of yourself, even though you might be drawn to the light or you might be a very positive person, which is not all about that. Sometimes, as we were just talking about, sometimes we can all get stuck in the mud, and we deserve something to pull us out and honor our spirit. And so that's a huge part of what I do in my practice, is empowering my patients to have the tools for those times when they aren't able to be there for themselves. But also, many of my patients are pillars of their family. There may be the matriarch or the patriarch or the grandparent, and they're involved in a lot of grandchild care. So they find it's another level of rigor and work. So in naturopathic medicine, a huge component of what draw me to it initially was when I was really young, I was exposed to a lot of infectious disease. And starting from when I was 7 months old, my caretaker was taking care of her fellow grandchildren, and they had the chicken pox. They were home from school with the chicken pox. And as a 7 month old, I was there for my caretaking, and I ended up getting the chicken pox. And my parents and grandparents were so apprehensive that I wasn't going to survive, because it's a very young age to battle one of those pox viruses. They're pretty nasty. Obviously, when you get it older, you're usually 5, 6, 7 years old, and you're exposed from someone at school. Your immune system is a little different, and the anatomical development of the lymph nodes, particularly, and your immune response is a little different. So I was very sickly, and a few years later, I contracted something else, and I just couldn't seem to fight it. The physicians involved in my care, and this went on for over a year of like trying to get a diagnosis, trying to figure out what was going on. But I had some kind of infectious disease that my immune system wasn't fighting, and lymph was getting stuck in my lymph nodes. And for your listeners who are tuning in auditorily, I'm motioning to a lymph node chain along the side of my neck. So it is pretty pivotal, and there was a lot of swelling, and I now have some fibrotic chains there because of that initial inability to move that lymph through. But the body moves the immune cells and the immune response through the lymph. This is something that, is still a burgeoning science, honestly, but this was more than 30 years ago that this was all happening. And so what the physicians wanted to do was surgically excise or surgically remove those lymph nodes. And it was kind of a concern because it's a significant chunk of lymph nodes off one side of your body. And all of this circulation alongside these lymph nodes, you have veins, you have arteries, you have nerves. So excising a component, especially in such an area, like probably if you've seen, a horror film or something, and those like a slasher movie, there's the carotids right there, and sometimes someone bleeds out. So that's right around the area that we're talking about, excising those lymph nodes. And so my parents, my a little bit of context, my grandmother grew up in Mexico. My mom grew up in a small town in Mexico. So, and my great grandmother had an ability to heal with herbs. So there was a lot of concern from both sides of the family about this removal. And so my dad was really close. His best friend at the time was worked with a tribal medicine man. He was Tohono O'odham, which is a Native American tribe in the area where I'm based in Arizona. And so they pulled a lot of strings, but they ended up taking me to the medicine man, the shaman of that tribe, and one of the tribal elders, and he was able to utilize herbs to heal those lymph nodes. I said they're still fibrotic, so they moved the lymph through and the swelling went significantly down, but it was swollen to like the size of a golf ball for over a year. And I still have a lot of scars and variation around the ear in particular from all of that swelling. But it was really incredible what all he was able to do, and it happened in a really short amount of time, a couple of weeks, compared to being sick for over a year. So all of those experiences kind of start to mold you. You start to become very interested in like, okay, so there was option A and there were no other options, but then from a totally other area, we find options B, C, and D. And I still have those lymph nodes. I didn't end up getting them excised. But when you have these infectious disease, this is a component of sometimes developing autoimmune disease. When you have these infectious disease issues, and your body's trying to fight things off and you're so young, you sometimes form an unnatural response to infectious disease in the future. So I did end up developing several autoimmune conditions. It makes me really easily able to support my autoimmune warriors because I'm also one. But that was a little bit about my journey is, what other alternatives are there? And so originally I was really interested in botanical medicine. That was my huge focus. I went to the University of Arizona and got my bachelor's of science in plant sciences. I focused really heavily on medicinal ethnobotany, so how are plants used in not only a tribal capacity, but let's say 100 years ago, because antibiotics are very young and they clearly didn't work for me. 100 years ago, what were we doing? What was more common? And so I started focusing on that. And I came to realize I love botanical medicine and herbalism. And I got to learn from a lot of herbalists. I got to learn more from my grandmother and my mom, what she could remember from my great grandmother's use, and what we call a lot of kitchen medicine, our
Uh-huh.
spices and our food, and how all that plays a role. And I'm just such a curious person that I was like, this is not enough for me. One modality is not enough for me. And eventually I got exposed to naturopathic medicine and decided to become, in addition, I'm now an herbalist, but in addition to being an herbalist, I'm also a naturopathic physician. And that journey really, I believe, began by becoming so unwell at such a young age, and then being kind of forced to heal from within so that I could survive. And then after survival, how do you thrive? How do you prosper? How do you go on to support others who have faced something similar in the healthcare community? Because my story is really not that unique. When you start polling people, it's very common. That the experience is like this, that there was only the option to surgically excise something. And there weren't a lot of options. But you don't know what you don't know. And that's why I
Yeah.
decided to go to naturopathic school.
Wow, what an incredible story. I think, I have a friend, she's a spiritual teacher, and she says that your gifts show up around you when you're young, and yours showed up through that experience. And so was that something that you as a young person were thinking, I want to go into this, or did you sort of, have this desire to do something different and then circled back to naturopathic medicine now?
That is such a great question. So I love so many different things. I'm a photographer. I dabble in different forms of art. I really, at some point in my life, really liked origami. I considered being an American Sign Language instructor, but I always, like, you could always find me outside. Everybody would be like, "Where's Lily?" Like the playground time. Our playground had like a grassy area, and I was always apparently like in the grassy area, like looking for four-leaf clovers and keeping myself occupied. And we would go camp. We, from a very young age, would go camping. And I'm really outdoorsy. I love backpacking, kayaking, sailing. I grew up doing much of that. And so it's what we call in like the world of multiple intelligences, that there's a psychological study of like we have, 7 and 8 multiple intelligences. And so someone who's more into movement, like maybe they studied applied kinesiology, they might have more of the mobile kinesthetic multiple intelligence. And someone who's really into nature may tend toward a naturalistic multiple intelligence. Someone who's very artistic, depending upon the nature of their art, maybe they like music or maybe they like drawing. There are different aspects of interest. And so for me, apparently I was always outside. I don't remember all the details, like being 7 months old. Definitely don't remember having the chicken pox, but
Hmm.
supposedly I've always been very interested, and I'm like bringing, I'm like, oh, look at this herb, and look at, and not just like from an herbal standpoint, but from a natural standpoint of like, wow, look at the symmetry in this flower, or look at the beauty of the sun sparkling through the trees. So I've always just had an interest in the creative aspects of interfacing with the world and with the natural world, and the fact that we are components of the natural world, although we do live in these environments now where we see ourselves often as separate when we live in
Hmm.
urban cities and things like that, the urban concrete jungle, right?
Hmm.
But apparently you could always find me out and about, with my head in nature. But when I was in school in plant sciences, it was I could and I still own a lot of the knowledge. I still regularly utilize a lot of the knowledge. I also studied agricultural system biosystems engineering as part of what I did in plant science, and that's like in a greenhouse, how do you grow things? How do you create systems that you can grow things? Because in Arizona, particularly in Tucson and in Phoenix, where I spend most of my time, we don't have a lot of consistent water access or
Mm.
rainfall. So I was learning about how would I grow these medicinal plants that I so love year round when it's 120 in the degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, and then in the winter it can drop. People don't often know this. It can drop to 28. Our pipes freeze. Sometimes it snows. So if I'm a plant living in this environment, how do I prosper? So I spent a lot of time learning about greenhouses and grow systems, hydroponics, sustainability. I was also an environmental science minor, so I wanted to figure out how could we have systems where we can produce food like aquaculture or aquaponics. I don't know if you're familiar, Heather, but
Yeah.
growing fish in environments, and then you could have water in that environment or create fertilizer from the fish. Often it's tilapia in the model, and then create like a full circle system. So anyway, I don't know if I was
Wow.
always interested, but I like all the things, and so I have a lot of background in that as well.
Amazing. Okay, I love that. That's so fascinating. I'm always so curious about what people were interested in when they were kids because I was a very creative kid. I loved art, I loved music, and but I got off the path and went down human resources for 20 years and then came back to art in my late 30s. So
Oh,
I feel
interesting.
like you either kind of go down the path of your childhood, like innate curiosity, where you sort of, I think, go through some sort of breakthrough, breakdown that then leads you back to what you're here to do. So I'm always curious about that. If somebody is new to herbal medicine, like what do you say to them? Because maybe it's a two-part question. I'm thinking in traditional medicine, the doctors wanted to excise, as you said, or take out those lymph nodes. But herbal medicine feels really hard and really tough. And I don't want to use the word violent, but you're cutting the skin, you're cutting into the body versus herbal medicine that feels very gentle and, but it's very powerful. So I don't want to dismiss the power in that. So how do you explain the power and the benefit of herbal medicine, and how you use it to help people heal in this day?
Well, that it's truly a great question because people often think, oh, it's a plant, it's more gentle, it's more safe. And it's actually not necessarily the case. And that's a huge component of what I do in my office is like, all right, someone's started themselves on this because they read this article or they saw that. Nowadays, it's like they saw this TikTok video. And I'm like, no. Okay, so what did
True.
they say in this video? And then I'm like, okay, well, here's the query, here's the concern, here's the. So every time you're considering herbal medicine, you've always got to consider, are you taking a medication? There are side effects to medications. There are contraindications for starting a plant when you're on a certain medication. There can be interactions. Medications do deplete enzymes, right? So when we're thinking about it from a biochemical standpoint and everything's shunting through these pathways, because we as human beings, we are biochemical, um, physiological pathways. We our body, in order to operate, shunts metabolites or utilizes enzymes to activate pathways, and a lot of those enzymes use vitamins as a cofactor. And so if you're on a medication, um, let's think a common medication people are on, and often for too long, is omeprazole or a proton pump inhibitor for reflux, for esophageal reflux. So very common. Many people will call it heartburn. They may be put on this PPI, and they don't always know what it's called. And then I go investigate, and I'm like, oh, this is a 6-week therapy. You've been on this for 10 years. Okay, so this depletes B vitamins, and it does that. It doesn't necessarily, that's not the main action. Obviously, it's to inhibit the proton pump. But as you're going through these biochemical processes, your body needs enzymes and vitamins to go through the pathway. They act as gatekeepers, they act as activators. And this is for everything, like fat metabolism, to gain energy from food that you're consuming, to
Hmm.
even have a normal sleep wake cycle, your normal circadian rhythm cycle, to process and digest food appropriately. All of that is intertwined into this component of extracting and assimilating nutrients. So oftentimes when people are going to start botanical, they don't know, oh, you can't take while you're on this PPI or while you're on your levothyroxine, you can't take this botanical. And so really it comes down to knowing and seeking a provider. And I'm finding like more and more people are educating themselves a little bit of like, if my patient is taking lavender for their anxiety, that might be an interference with this mood tranquilizer or this sleep med that they're on. So there is a lot of it's a change in what I'm seeing as I refer, but working with someone who has that knowledge can really be helpful, because otherwise you can start things that you think are safe and gentle, but
Hmm.
they truly aren't. And we could say things about food, and
Yeah.
many people don't get educated about this even when they go pick up a prescription from their pharmacy. But grapefruit is a great example. I don't know, Heather, if you've ever
Yeah.
taken a med, even like a short-term antibiotic, and then been told, don't eat this near grapefruit because
We
it,
were
and
just talking about that the other day. Yeah. My
were
husband
you?
and I were. Hmm.
Yes, and sometimes you go to pick up your prescription and they just are so busy there that no one tells you. And so your body's cycling through. So a little bit of background for those of you that maybe don't know. Grapefruit is a classic interaction with, it has something, I want to say it's furanocoumarins, like that's the active constituent. But you process things typically in your liver or your kidneys or your small intestines. Those are our huge components of organs of elimination, our bowel in the small intestine. And then with the grapefruit, it activates something called the CYP3A4 enzyme. It's a cytochrome within, it exists in the small intestine and the liver, but it amplifies your processing time of the medication. So you might process it much more quicker than you should, and you might not have it, like say, you take it near, a classic example is levothyroxine, which is a thyroid medication. Then you don't have your as much thyroid medication available to you in your body because your body was increased, which is great. Grapefruit's great when you're in a detox or as a standalone thing, to increase your metabolism. But when you're taking a medication or even an herb, many herbs, the same issue, you break it down quicker or you don't metabolize things because that cytochrome isn't working as it should. So
Hmm.
you can have too much in the bloodstream and it can become unsafe. And so, that's a subtle thing. This is springtime. This is a great season. Many people have grapefruit coming out on their trees. They're often planted ornamentally in many neighborhoods or many residential areas. So you might have a lot of access to grapefruit and you don't know, oh, we think it's just a gentle fruit that we're consuming, but it does have a lot of safety concern. And many people
Hmm.
don't necessarily get that information, get that feedback.
Incredible. I was just working with a functional health doctor myself, and we were talking about how your body is a chemistry set, and if something is off in your system, it throws everything off. And one of the things we were talking about, not to be TMI, but is my blood pressure. And I've had high blood pressure. And so we looked at certain numbers in my blood work about inflammation and digestion and all of these. And she said, she was explaining to me how if there's higher glucose, if there's inflammation, that can all impact the heart. And you have the symbol of the heart on your website, and I also love that your last name is Hartwell too. I just think that that's a really fun um, synchronicity there. So tell us about we had kind of talked a little bit in the green room, I guess, about heart health and how everything sort of kind of functions around this highly important organ, and how you sort of work with patients to find this like holistic approach to overall well-being.
Okay. So it's such a the heart as an organ of governs almost every aspect of your being. But in terms of blood pressure, like we were just speaking about, blood pressure can be raised or lowered. I often will see it's two extremes. It's often too high or it's too low. And we're seeing that to be really common too, which is like a thyroid dysfunction or your adrenal
Mm.
glands, these little neurotransmitter releasers that sit on top of your kidneys aren't appropriately creating your neurotransmitters so that your body's at a metabolic maintenance level to respond to stress appropriately. And with high blood pressure, oftentimes it could be a nutrient imbalance. It could be too much salt in the bloodstream, too much sodium, which can influence these cells and receptors that we were talking about and over amplify gates that shouldn't be amplified. But blood pressure as a whole is just how blood is moving through your body, primarily through your heart, and then out your systemic circulation. And oftentimes, when you are stressed, whether it's at an acknowledgeable level or not, there are many people that say, I feel like I'm not that stressed. And then when they take a vacation, they're like, wow, was I stressed? And sometimes you're dealing, and I see it a lot with moms your or caretakers, not to say that only moms are caretakers, but those that are responsible for raising their children primarily, I see this very common is they're so used to a tantrum, or the dog has had an accident in the house and child is throwing a tantrum on the floor and food is burning on the stove. They're so used to so many stressors that the threshold of stress is a lot higher for
Mm-hmm.
them. And so they don't always know, they don't have a lot of time to curate a self-care routine, a coping strategy for their nervous system. So their nervous system is constantly putting out this sympathetic response to run from the bear, to fight the saber-toothed tiger. And when they try to come down, maybe they're insomniacs, or they can't rest, or they need their glass of, the common complaint in my office is, I
Mm-hmm.
need my glass of red wine every night. You're telling me I can't have this? You don't understand that I need this. So then we might, pro offer some herbs that will help to bring that nervous system down to more of a parasympathetic state, the rest and digest state. But a huge component of heart health really comes from how are you what's your lifestyle, how often are you exercising, what are you consuming that are heart healthy foods. And I usually have like a list that I put together that I recommend to people. But we can really accidentally raise and lower blood pressure by taking too much of an herb, or eating too much of a food,
Mm.
maybe that's sodium heavy, which can ultimately impact your blood pressure. And also, what we see in issues of cardiovascular health is there's usually also a lipid issue. So maybe they've been diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, I think it's now called non-alcoholic steatosis, which
Mm.
is just fatty liver. Your liver is depositing, and the liver is our main organ that mobilizes fat. So maybe when you go get your blood work and you get responses like, this is what your cholesterol level is like, this is what your HDL or your high density lipoprotein is like. Those lipoproteins are shuttled and transported throughout your liver and then go out into your bloodstream. And so if we have an inability to properly mobilize and store our fat, which could be also a gallbladder issue, we start to see these issues at large. So oftentimes if you have high blood pressure, you'll often have an issue processing um, your fats. You might be diagnosed with hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol, hypercholesterolemia, and then need to make diet and lifestyle changes to mitigate that as well. We see that
Yeah.
a lot more commonly in like a high salt diet and a high fat diet. Maybe it's heavy on animal protein and not a lot of whole foods in other places. Or maybe it's the this type of food that's being consumed. Like I have a few patients who they can tell if something's not organic. I don't recommend everything be organic, because oftentimes not cost effective or approachable for the patient. But someone was just sharing with me that they notice when they consume fruit. Like for example, he was talking to me about grapefruit. He would notice when he consumed organic versus non-organic grapefruit that he had a headache with the non-organic, and the only discernible difference was that that it was sprayed with something.
Wow.
um so it's interesting because we wouldn't consume the rind. We shouldn't expect that. The rind's supposed to protect, but I find some people are more sensitive to
Yeah.
some things than others, whether it's food, whether it's botanical medicine, whether it's a medication. Many of my patients actually seek naturopathic care and botanical medicine because they had an overreaction or a hypersensitivity response, or they were the 1 in 1,000 that had the medication response that they shouldn't have. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's all a consideration as you're working on your heart health and ultimately your liver health, is like
Yeah.
your lifestyle, your exercise, the food that you get to choose, how much time you have for that, right? Like you spend a lot of time discussing being your most radiant, energetic self.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you have the time for that when you have a million other things to do and a million other things to take care of, and you're constantly being inundated by notifications? We're walking around with these little mini computers all the time. How do you remind yourself to hydrate and eat whole food when
Mm-hmm.
they're accessible at all times in a way that, 100 years ago we simply weren't?
Right.
And that's taxing on the nervous system. That shifts you into sympathetic, and it's exhausting. It can really deplete the soul and the
Yeah.
adrenal glands and the organs.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I was just talking to somebody the other day about self-care and self-love, and we were talking about the mental load that moms carry or caretakers carry, where you are just responsible for, like you talked about, the dog and the kids and the dinner and the backpack and the homework and your own job and all of those things. How do you take a minute for yourself and just go, I just need 5 seconds to breathe. It's so important. And taking care of our health is so important. And I think a lot of us, I know me especially too, we don't really think about our health until something goes wrong. And then you go, oh no, now I've got to unwind years of bad behavior,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of not taking care of myself. So if somebody wants to start integrating this type of healing into their life, what do you recommend is the first approach? How do you work with people to get them started?
So on a foundational level, I always like to say, take a look at the building blocks. How much water are you drinking? Like, for those of you that are not able to see us, Heather's been very consistent with hydration, which is incredible. And it's really common, like, we living in the Sonoran Desert, many people are chronically dehydrated. So they want to, take this supplement or do this, or, they've gotten a targeted ad for this on social, and I'm like, we don't even need that yet. Did you sleep last night? Did you drink your water? What are you putting not only into your mouth, but into your mind? I have a
Hmm.
patient who chronically, she'll watch, like, before bed, 4 hours of these shows of, like, murder mystery, real life, not even fake, like real life murder mystery. And then she's like, her husband's like, she screamed in the night. And I was like, do we really have to go
Can't
far to
imagine why.
wonder? I think it's pretty clear. And sometimes people just don't realize that, right? Like, because you're shifting your nervous system, as we just were discussing, into a sympathetic fight or flight mode, or a freeze mode for some people, where you're just unable to do anything. You have an inability of paralysis. So I often will start with that. What is our sleep hygiene like? Are you getting enough sleep? What is your water intake like? What are you putting into your mouth? So take a look at your diet. What are your meals looking like? A lot of my busy my busy caretaker patients, they're not even getting 3 consistent meals. They're eating on the go, and it's often something really convenient. And, like, we all do this. I'm very busy myself, so I have to consciously curate food that's healthy for me. So because I can't exactly eat a donut every day, right? That's just not going to be accessible. I have a being Hispanic, I have a predisposition for diabetes, and it's very concerning for me. I spend a lot of time being mindful with myself. What am I drawn to? Because when
Uh-huh.
you're burned out and you're in that chronic stress state, your body wants salty things and your body wants sugary things, and it's all about releasing the appropriate things from your adrenal glands to support you in that. But those fast choices, how do we make those fast food choices more accessible, more healthy? How do we curate a meal prep system so that when you go to grab something and you got to rush to take kiddos to school, that you have something that they can take? And then with the stress piece, I'll have people start involving their kiddos and just being honest, like, hey, mom needs a second. Can we do this together? Can this
Hmm.
be a teaching moment so that, and I just wrote an article about this, self-care in mothers and caretakers influences what the child develops over time from a mental health standpoint, and what they may go to do later on in their life
Mm.
because of the building blocks. And so moms are just trying to survive, and everyone else is just like along for the ride. But how can we teach our kiddos to curate these opportunities in the moment? So I'll do something oftentimes that I'll encourage my patients to do is say the words peace begins with me and involve their fingers. And if they have young kids, they let the kiddos love it, and then we're like, oh, well, what does that mean? And it gives a sense of peace, just taking a moment and like, all right, everyone quiet. Can we just be with ourselves for a moment? Can we involve a different part of the brain instead of this go, 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 go moment? Can we just breathe, take some breaths, take a moment with our hands to just, all right, let me come back to center. And then from here, with more of a clear mind, where do we go? What's the next step? So it really comes down to, how do we make things quick? How do we make things efficient? How do we take care of ourselves? throughout time, and make sure that we're eating a whole food diet, which can be very inaccessible sometimes from a cost standpoint. I've been really getting into like farmers markets, bartering with other people who have, like, I have a lot of citrus, so I'll trade some citrus for some. My friend grows Swiss chard and kale, and my partner, he hates he hates Swiss chard and he hates kale. So it's like, okay, now I got to get inventive with what is our recipe going to be? How can we do it quick? So I'll have some things prepared. How do we do our brown rice olive oil stir fry? And how do we make these easier choices? It involves oftentimes both people, both
Mm-hmm.
members of the household. And then how can we get our kiddos involved? Maybe they're chopping something or mushing something with their
Mm-hmm.
hands, or it becomes a whole family involvement, so that your lifestyle moving forward can be healthier. But it does take a little bit more effort, absolutely. But it's once you get your go-tos of like, all right, everyone in the house knows how to do this, it becomes way easier. You're not learning a new recipe every night. So what you're putting into your mouth, and then the other thing is what you're putting into your brain. So what are we constantly getting exposed to? I mentioned, the slasher film or the murder mystery right before bed. That's just not going to be serving for most people. What's our peace looking like? How are we curating rest, not just sleep, but I don't think we talk enough about rest in our society, of like,
Mm-hmm.
did you take time for, and it looks different for different people. I love to go hiking. Some people love puzzling. They're puzzlers, or they
Mm-hmm.
like to play cards, or they like to read a book, trying to move away from a device. So I try to say, like, can we take time away from a television, or take time away from doom scrolling on social?
Yeah.
Is there, some people like to write poetry or make origami or paint, and it doesn't have anything to do with how good you are at it, right? As creatives, it's just getting the experience to dabble in another part of your mind, activating yourself in a different way, and leaning into that, something that brings joy. So those are my
Mm-hmm.
essentials. Before I say take this and do that, it's kind of studying the foundation, studying the pillars, and then how do we move from there to curate more of that in your life.
Oh, I love that. That's so wonderful. And I think I was going to ask you, what is one thing that we can do to amplify our radiant spirits now? But I kind of want to take from your peace begins with me, because that is such a gift, right? To just pause and say that's kind of like a mantra. It's something that you can kind of even breathe with, right? To help you calm down. And I think that's the biggest thing for a lot of us these days, is finding that sense of peace so that we can sort of restore this place in ourselves that wants to shine. And a lot of times we just get so overloaded that we dull our sparkle. So if you have something else to add to that, I'd love it. But I think that's the one thing um, that I picked up on, that I was like, oh, I love that. I want to take that with me into my week. That's
Yes,
wonderful.
take that with you. Also, generally eat the rainbow. So if you feel like your everything on your plate is brown, we're really not getting all the nutrients we need. Like, you can think of the colors of some of the food, obviously not what's been dyed, but the whole food of, like, okay, so how often are we eating purple things? How often are we eating orange things, pink thing, and kind of brings us to your radiant spirit whole theme of color, right?
Yeah,
Like, are we eating the rainbow? Are we diversifying our diet? So that's another thing I like to consider is, are we doing things in moderation, or are we eating mac and cheese every night of the week? Right?
yeah,
Leftovers are really convenient, but couldn't we add some things in there to spice it up, even if it's a garnish that becomes edible, like a little fresh rosemary? I've been really getting into my rosemary lately because it has a lot of
hmm
cognitive benefits. So I think those are the main things. And I also don't get to hold, it's not my original work, The Peace Begins With Me, but it is something that I did discover at one point a few years ago. And I have just found that in and of itself, if you can incorporate that for 21 days, because research shows more than 21 days makes a habit, that is a game changer, in addition to these things like rest and sleep. That oftentimes we don't even need to do the next thing for a while, because that's what the soul was seeking.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. That's what the soul was seeking. Oh, that's perfect. I love that. So Dr. Lily, how can people work with you if they want to? Where can we find you?
I think we're Dr. Lillea Hartwell with the odd Lily spelling of Lillea on most everything. And I think our website has almost everything. People will email if they have follow-up questions. We have a frequently asked questions site there. We have like a freebie library with meditations, some recipe books for people who do find that, they can't tolerate dairy or they can't tolerate gluten for whatever reason, or they're trying to opt for less sugar. So we'll have a few recipe books in there, smoothies. I find that smoothies can make things really accessible and they can be really approachable for kiddos too. So sometimes that's a limitation if you're a caretaker, is you're making a meal for yourself, but you're also making a meal for littles. So can we make something that they can consume as well? And then we're not making, 3 different types of breakfast and trying to get out the door into school on time before the bell rings. So that can be a really great space to find us, find more information. But I do always encourage, if you are interested in botanical medicine, find someone who's confident in those interactions that I mentioned, because I have a fair number of people who come to me and they've self-started something, and their physician who's prescribing this mood stabilizer or whatever didn't know that there's a reason why they've been so sleepy or sedated, and it's because they started this herb that has an interaction, so you need to take it 2 hours away. So finding someone that has that knowledge can be really helpful. You're welcome to reach out to me. I do work with folks across the state lines, and we have some patients who are across the ocean too. The role is a little different in terms of diagnosis, but I'm very clear about that all up front. But I do find that that's a great place to start. It is our website, drlilliehartwell.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to include all of that information in the show notes today. And I just want to thank you so much for being the guest today. I learned so much from you, and I feel like my own personal health journey has started with really trying to get enough sleep, cutting out alcohol, really looking for whole foods, eating the rainbow. And I feel like a lot of what you've said today was just affirmation of that effort to continue and keep pushing my water, to keep getting outside, fresh air, walks, all of that stuff. So thank you so much. I'm so happy to have been able to meet you and to chat with you today.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you for having me as a guest. I really appreciate it, and for allowing me to share. It's a ripple effect. Who knows what all we'll be able to accomplish together with this little episode. Who we encourage to go do their New Year, New You, because the months are ticking on by.
They really are. They really are. Thank you again.
Thank you for joining us on Your Radiant Spirit. If today's episode lit up your creativity or helped you connect with your inner energy, please leave us a review and share your thoughts. Your feedback helps us spread more light to others. To dive deeper, visit www.heathereck.com for courses, workshops, and custom spirit portraits. And for daily inspiration and behind-the-scenes magic, follow Heather on Instagram at @HeatherEckArtist. Your radiant spirit is calling. Take the next step on your journey. See you next time.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.